So here comes another video in our spicy opening series, and we've covered a lot of options now from the white side after Fischer's favorite move, pawn to e4. And we've come up with some very interesting and strange ideas. I'm giving away my basically secret opening repertoire here. And my secret opening repertoire has always been geared towards getting the initiative as white, attacking with white at all costs, and putting the pressure on my opponent from an earliest stage as possible. It's a bit like the Mike Tyson chess opening repertoire, I'd say. Mike Tyson, a completely crazy boxer, straight at his opponent. And this is what this repertoire is kind of geared around. It's not a long, low, slow play attacking repertoire. It's straight towards the throat. And in this video, I'm going to show you some interesting ideas against the Scandinavian opening. Now, we've looked at a lot of other things, and the Scandinavian is what the emphasis is going to be here. And that's after the move d5, which is actually quite popular, I find, at club level. I've always found this move d5 rather strange, to be honest. It doesn't to me, I mean, it really work for black. I know it's quite popular, but you'll never really see this move be played at top level, and there's a reason for that. White has a number of ways to play. But I'm going to suggest maybe not the most popular ways to play against this, but still a very aggressive way to play. And that is by, first of all, capturing on d5 here. And now queen takes d5 is black's main option. Very quickly, if black tries knight to f6, which is so-called the Portuguese variation, I think a very simple way to get a nice game here is not by trying to hold on to the d5 pawn. This can lead you into danger if you play a move like c4. Don't be greedy here. Remember, we're the side who needs to get the initiative. We are white. We need to get the initiative. A much better move is simply something like knight to f3 here. Let our opponent take back on d5 for a knight, and then just put a pawn in the center of the board, d4. And we're going to go c4 shortly. Bishop comes to e2 or d3 with a very comfortable advantage due to our space edge in the center. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. I've included a game in the PGN, the notes to this video, if you want to have a look at that, just to give you a bit more in-depth show. But I want to really in this video concentrate on what happens if black takes on d5 with the queen, which is the most popular option. Well, I think we should attack the queen straight away, knight to c3. And here, black has three options, three decent options of where the queen goes. At club level, I find queen to a5 the most popular. Queen to d6 is also a possibility, and also queen to d8. Other moves make no sense to me. If, for example, black tries to check your king, well, this is really beginner's chess. You can't play like this, because we can simply block the check and attack the queen next move. Makes no sense at all. Now, as a general rule, if our opponent puts his queen on this square, d6, or this square, d8, I'm going to recommend a setup where you basically go knight to f3, pawn to d4, and knight to e5 very quickly. So that's your setup against the queen coming to one of these two squares. We'll come to that a bit later on. First of all, what is the setup against queen to a5? Well, here I think a very good setup, and one that might surprise your opponent, is not by placing your pawn on d4. Pawn to d4 is the most common move. Your opponent will be well prepared against this, and I don't think it's the most aggressive or best option even. I think a much more better option is the following plan. Place your bishop on c4, a brilliant diagonal for the bishop where it's attacking f7. Once your bishop has gone to c4, we go pawn to d3. What are the advantages of putting the pawn on d3 rather than d4, you may be asking? Well, when the pawn goes to d4, it becomes a target to attack for black. Black can play moves like c5, knight to c6 to attack this pawn. When our pawn is on d3, none of these things matter. We can just go pawn to d3. It's very safe and secure. What do we do next? We put our bishop on d2, x-raying the black queen. And then we put our queen to e2, preparing to castle queenside. You can see it's getting more and more aggressive, this line, just the way I like it, quite spicy. And then after that, what do we do with our knight on g1? nearly always against the Scandinavian, I aim to go knight to f3, knight to e5. So I put a lot of paint, green paint on the board there. Let me just try to get rid of some of this paint. And now we're going to see some of these ideas in operation. And again, always with these videos, I throw so much information at you. It's a good idea sometimes to look at the video 2 times, 3 times. Maybe you just like my voice and you want to go to bed with the video in the background. But please don't tell me that, because I'd be a little bit concerned if that was the case. But okay, on to a game. And Nigel Short is one of the main, I would say, experts in this variation. So let's take a Nigel Short game. Nigel Short, obviously, I'm sure most of you know about Nigel Short. He was World Championship challenger at one stage against Kasparov, very aggressive player from England. So bishop c4. Knight to f6, black develops. We continue our plan, pawn to d3. And now, how does black continue here? Well, as a rule, if black ever goes bishop to g4, we're going to see this in action in a minute, we go f3, and then we can continue with g4. If our opponent does not play his bishop to g4, plays other plans, we simply continue with the setup we've discussed. For example, c6 here, bishop to d2, as discussed. Queen to c7, looks like a good move, otherwise there's going to be some trick, x-ray against the queen. Queen to e2, look at this plan come into action, so simple. Castle's queenside is probably going to be coming next. You don't have to, but it's an idea. Let's say bishop to g4 now. And what was the rule if the bishop goes to g4? We go f3. And if the bishop tries to keep on the active square, like f5, I mean, if the bishop ever went to d7, black was worried that at some point, let's say after castle's queenside e6, the bishop is bad because it's placed behind the pawn structure. So the way black is trying to play here after bishop to f5 is trying to keep the bishop on an active square. But now this is a real target. And now you can start throwing your kingside pawns up the board. And this is precisely what Nigel Short did. Pawn to g4, bishop to g6, pawn to f4. And this is incredibly dangerous already. Maybe black is already lost here. f5 is coming. h5, giving the bishop an escape square. But f5 came anyway. Bishop dropped back to h7, but this is like, oh, this is like a very, very bad piece now. I mean, this is more like a pawn than a bishop. It's really lost all its potential. I mean, it just looks like a big pawn on h7. You can't really call this a bishop. I don't think it really deserves to be called a bishop. And now Nigel played a very nice tactic. Keep those pawns rolling. g5, knight to g4, and he used a little tactic here. Bishop takes f7 check. King takes f7, pawn to g6 check. And okay, we're not going to look at the rest of this game. I don't think it's important for the theory of this. This is a good position for white, mainly because of white's hold of the e6 square. White can aim to get a knight into e6 or into g6, and he still can castle quickly. So I think that shows you some of the potential of this opening. Let's just have a look at some other lines then in this. After queen takes d5, knight to c3, queen to a5. Well, hopefully now you remember to play bishop to c4. Let's say our opponent again goes knight to s6. We go d3. Now, last time we considered the move c6 here. Let's say instead our opponent tries bishop to f5 immediately. So he doesn't go bishop to g4 because this would encourage us to go f3 and g4. So that would help us. But this looks like a sensible move. Put the bishop on a square, try to go e6. So the bishop is outside the pawn structure. What do we do? Well, we continue in our normal fashion. Bishop to d2, getting ready for a knight jump. And there was one very entertaining game here where, well, entertaining for white, not so entertaining for black, where black now played c6. White continued with his plan, queen to e2. Lovely square for the queen, getting ready to castle queenside. And here, without thinking, black played knight on b to d7. Black should have played a move like e6 here, when white can just continue with this other plan. Remember that plans I said right at the start was, we castle at some stage, but where do we put the knight on g1? Can you remember where I said that knight should go in the Scandinavian? Where should it go to? This knight should land on e5. You should go knight to f3, knight to e5. And for example, here, if you play that, knight to f3, queen d8, he has to get out of this discovered attack at some stage. Knight to e5. Now you're ready to launch again with this. And you have all your pieces developed. You're ready to castle. Your opponent's a bit cramped. I think it's a very pleasant position for white. But what was this mistake I mentioned before? E6 was a better move, but there was one very amusing game between quite a strong player. I mean, white was Thomas Luther, who's a strong grandmaster, against Helgner, who is a 2200 player, and he even fell for this trick. And the trick was knight on b to d7. And now, can you see the win? White to play and win. Let's test your tactical ability. Just imagine you had this in a game. White to play and win. Knight to b5 is the move. And the bishop is releasing a discovered attack against the queen. The queen has to move. Where does the queen move to? Well, let's say the queen goes back to d8. That looks like a safe square for the queen. Thank you very much. Knight to d6. See you later. Spicy attack. Round of applause, please. That's a nice move. And whatever happens, white's going to play this move anyway. Again, this just shows you some of the dangers of this very simple setup. So my suggestion against a queen to a5 move is, as we said before, bishop c4, d3, bishop d2, queen e2. Your knight goes to e5. You can castle kingside. The other thing to remember is if your opponent ever gets bishop g4 in, you can go f3 and g4, start the kingside attack. Now, what about these other options instead of queen to a5? What about queen to d6? This move actually became quite trendy in the last 10 years because of the efforts of the Dutch grandmaster Tiviakov. Tiviakov, a very strong player, and he started playing queen d6 at top level. But then he lost a horrible game to the fire on the board himself, Alexei Shirov. There was actually another funny story about Tiviakov, and I'm a regular player in the Bumrati tournament in Ireland, and it's a brilliant, fun weekend tournament. I don't know if you have the same in America or elsewhere, but if you get a chance to play Bumrati, you should. Bumrati is played in this rural place in Ireland. It's by a castle. It's lovely. They've got one of the oldest pubs in Ireland there, and it's really a bit of a fun social event. Tiviakov went to this tournament one weekend, and I think he won the tournament. But the tournament organisers, I was speaking to him in the bar, and I said, "Oh, he's won the tournament. I guess he'll be invited back next year." And they said, "No, he won't be invited back." And I was like, "Oh, why won't you invite him back?" And they said, "He didn't drink 1 pint of Guinness the whole time." So I thought that was quite funny. The way they invite players to Bumrati was the amount of Guinness that you drink. But okay, I'm drifting from the game here. After the move queen d6, how do we play this? Well, my simple suggestion here is to go very quickly d4, knight to f3, knight to e5, and then f4, g4. This is a Shirov plan, and Shirov has used this to devastating effect. For example, d4 was played here by Shirov in one game. Black now played knight to f6. You know what our plan is now. Knight to f3. If our opponent played bishop to g4 here, I'd simply play bishop to e2 and then knight to e5 next move anyway. c6 is a more common idea, the main line. Shirov now played knight to e5. Knight to d7 was played from black. And now remember the move I said was good here? f4. And here we've stabilized a knight on the e5 square. And this, I think, is a very promising position for white. Shirov had one game that continued e6, and he now continued g4, really going for total pressure. And I'll show you a couple of moves. c5, g5, knight d5, knight to e4. Look at these strong knights in the center. Queen c7, c4. It's like the 4-pawn attack. Lovely, lovely variation. And white has all the pressure here, all the attack in play, with maybe the queen swinging out to h5. So this was a very promising variation here. So knight to e5, I think, is a very good way to play against this queen d6 line. So my simple bit of advice is go knight to f3, knight to e5, and f4. I mean, there was another game which went knight to b6 here, but white still played g4 here. So g4 came anyway. And your bishop always goes to g2. And you can castle kingside in this variation is the safest. For example, bishop e6, bishop g2, g6, castle's kingside, and now Shearoff broke with f5 at the right moment. But most of his play was based around his strong knight on e5. So that'd be my simple way of playing against queen to d6. Against queen to d6, well, we talked about it. Knight to f3, d4, knight to e5. So the last thing we need to consider is, what about queen to d8? Well, here we go d4 as par normal. And again, I want to go for a similar plan. I just want to do a similar plan as before to keep things simple. So after knight to f6, I want to play bishop to c4. Maybe I can play this first now because the queen's less active here. You can also go for knight to f3, knight to e5 immediately, but it always involves this knight coming to e5. This is one of the key points of the opening. For example, c6, knight to f3. Now, if you're pinned with bishop g4, you can just break the pin. And if bishop to f5, knight to e5. And now we start this very typical pawn side advance, g4 and h4, giving us a good position. Queen to d8 is quite a rare move, to be honest, so I don't think you need to worry about this. But one of the key things in the Scandinavian line is to get your knight to the e5 square. So this is one thing to remember. So to sum up very quickly, against the Scandinavian, hacking the Scandinavian, if your opponent puts his queen on a5 where it's tucked away, we want to go bishop c4, d3, bishop d2, and then queen to e2. And then we advance like that. If our opponent puts his queen somewhere else, let's say his queen goes to d6, well then we want to go d4, knight to f3, knight to e5, f4, this kind of attacking plan. If our opponent puts his queen on d8, what do we do then? Well, we do the same thing. After queen to d8, we want to go d4, bishop c4, knight to f3, knight to e5. And again, we could go into middle game positions, and I might do that a bit later in some other videos, but I think that's a perfect introduction. That's covered everything I want to give you for an introduction for playing against the Scandinavian. Anything else I think will maybe confuse things a little bit too much. You can see the attached PGN to this game. Hope you enjoyed that video. Please let me know how you get on with the opening, and check out the other openings in this spicy series, because all this spicy series will give you such a spicy repertoire. You'll be ready to kill everyone in 20 moves. Well, hopefully so. That's the idea. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye for now.